Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this special Zoom meeting. This is actually the first Zoom meeting that we're holding on behalf of what we're calling the 99% Pennsylvania campaign. It is, along with our state budget work, something that I've been tasked with getting up and running here at Pennsylvania Budget and Policy Center. This is going to be the vehicle that we use for mobilizing people in Pennsylvania to take action on federal issues. We are doing this largely in conjunction with our national office, as I like to call them, the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. We're pleased to have one of the members of the CBPP team with us here today. I'll introduce her momentarily. But this is a particularly important time for folks who are concerned about the state budget in Pennsylvania, that we have been meeting on Zoom meetings for the last several months to be engaging in federal action. As you know, I think most people are aware, before the end of May, our General Assembly and Governor Wolf had enacted a partial budget for fiscal year 2020-21. Fiscal year starts on July 1st. They flat funded education for the entire 12 months of the budget, but most of the rest of the budget is flat funded for just 5 months, meaning that the General Assembly and the governor will have to come back some point between now and the end of that 5th month to put together a complete version of the budget. It was clear in a lot of comments that the governor and even Republican legislative leaders were making when they completed this partial budget, that they are hoping, and if they're praying people, they're probably praying that the federal government will step in with another major coronavirus relief and recovery package. There is a tremendous need to offset revenue losses. The Independent Fiscal Office in Pennsylvania just a few weeks ago forecast that Pennsylvania will probably stand to lose about $5 billion in revenue between the end of May and the end of June next year, at the end of the fiscal year. So over about 13 months, that's a $5 billion loss in revenue. That's a pretty significant chunk of our state budget to lose. So there really is a need for federal dollars to offset this. In the previous coronavirus relief and recovery packages, including the CARES Act, the funds that were given to state governments were really limited for efforts directly responding to the pandemic. It was very explicitly stated that that was not to be used to backfill lost revenue in state budgets. So the previous funding really is not something that can be used to offset these tremendous budget losses. So that's why we and other organizations and Center on Budget and Policy Priorities are really advocating for a major coronavirus relief and recovery package that would direct significant resources, not just to state governments, but also to local governments. We're seeing all across the country, local governments and in other states making difficult decisions that with lost revenue from income taxes and other forms of revenue that they use to fund their budgets, that they are resorting to considering laying off employees, making cuts to essential services, and other ways of offsetting these losses. We don't want to see that have to be an option here in Pennsylvania. So we would really like to see this. So on that note, we do have some time to advocate over the next few weeks for this federal coronavirus relief and recovery package. I am really pleased to have with us our Deputy Director for State Programs at the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, Deborah Swerdlow. Some of you have met Deborah Swerdlow at some of our budget summits over the past few years. She is someone who's really a major asset to us here at Pennsylvania Budget and Policy Center in all of the work that we do. She is going to give us some updates about what the political landscape looks like right now related to this coronavirus relief and recovery package, and where we all together as advocates here in Pennsylvania can be working to make sure that our U.S. senators and our members of Congress know that Pennsylvania is desperately counting on them to take action. On that note, I'm turning it over to Deborah. Deborah?
Great. Thank you so much, Jeff. Thanks for inviting me and for your kind words and introduction. And thank you all on this call for the incredible work that you're doing amid this pandemic and recession. I imagine that there are some folks on here who are providing direct service in terms of helping people meet their basic needs. And also, you know, as Jeff mentioned, just some incredible state and federal level advocacy work that has been done so far to really make sure that federal and state governments are stepping up and taking the actions that they need to be taking to help people get through this. As Jeff mentioned, you know, thanks to all of the work that you all have done, there have been some pretty important measures passed so far in previous bills, things like expanded unemployment insurance benefits, stimulus payments to millions of households, including households without earnings, and some fiscal relief for state governments. But much more is needed, and it's needed very soon. As you all know, probably firsthand, these needs are very urgent. So,
Deborah,
you know, some of the
Deborah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I did neglect to give people some important information.
Sure.
You will have an opportunity to ask Deborah some questions. We have the Zoom meeting because we have many, many people on the line here. I think we're close to 60 people now. We have all of your lines muted. You will not be able to unmute them yourselves, but if you have questions, I would encourage you to put those into the chat box. You can also just note, I have a question for Deborah. That's all you need to say. And when we get to a time for Q&A, we'll call on folks and give people an opportunity to unmute the lines and ask Deborah the question directly. Sorry, I neglected to mention that.
Okay.
This is what happens when we take a week off of doing these Zoom meetings, and all of a sudden I forget what I'm supposed to tell people. So
That's all right.
we also have several members of the PBPC team who will be helping to field questions in the chat box. So if you have questions for PBPC staff, for our director, Mark Steer, or others, you can also put those into the chat box. But again, just note if you have a question for Deborah, and when we get to Q&A, I'll unmute your lines. Sorry to interrupt you, Deborah. I'll let you get back to that, but did need to make sure folks were aware of that.
Sure. Well, yeah, so I was just saying, you know, that there's been some great stuff in the bills, but also some shortcomings. One of the ones that I'll talk about that we really want to try to get taken care of in this next bill is that a lot of this aid is actually going to end too soon. So, you know, given the length and the depth of this recession that we're seeing. So, for example, the unemployment insurance expanded benefits end July 31st, even though unemployment is still double digits and is projected to stay pretty high throughout 2021. So there's finally agreement on both sides of the aisle that another COVID-19 federal aid package is going to be needed, but there is not bipartisan agreement right now on what should be in the next bill. So our task is to build support among the general public and among members of Congress for our key policy priorities of what needs to be in that bill. And we need members of Congress in both parties to be speaking up in support of these issues, to be rallying their colleagues to join them, and to be fighting for these issues in the negotiations. We also need a national narrative, and I think Pennsylvania is an important state for this, that really just delivers this message that more action is needed and soon to help people who are struggling. And that Congress really needs to step up and help people get through this. So, you know, that's the overall message. Some of the important issues under that umbrella, which this is certainly not an exhaustive list of all of the things that we would like to see in the next bill, but just some that I want to raise is, you know, Jeff already mentioned states needing more aid, more fiscal relief, as it's sometimes called, to be able to fill the revenue shortfalls that they are seeing because of, you know, both the rising costs of dealing with the pandemic and also the drops in revenue from people losing their income and so paying less in income taxes, and businesses being closed, so less in sales taxes and things like that. So aid can come in the form of direct money given to states, like through the Coronavirus Relief Fund in the CARES Act, and also through an increase in what's called FMAP, the federal matching rate for Medicaid funds, which is, as you all know from your state budget work, is such a big piece of the state budget. So that is a priority for the next bill. Also, an increase in SNAP benefits, which we know in the past is one of the best ways to get relief to people quickly so that they can help put food on the table, and also boost the economy because people are spending their SNAP benefits at the grocery store and at local retailers. There's also some really interesting proposals out there for other ways to get more assistance to families that are struggling. So one that I want to lift up is an idea for an emergency fund, which is similar to a TANF emergency fund that was created in 2009 in the last recession. And what that does is allow states to be able to draw funds that they can use to give cash assistance to people in need in the state, to give non-cash assistance, like if somebody is going to have trouble paying their rent, being able to pay their rent for them, and to support subsidized jobs programs in the state at a time when people are struggling to find employment, and businesses don't necessarily have as many jobs to offer as they had before. So that is a interesting proposal that we'd like to see in the next bill. There's also more we could see in terms of housing assistance and homelessness programs, protecting health coverage and expanding health coverage. Of course, we are in a pandemic, so health coverage is very important, and making some improvements to some of the relief that's been passed so far. And overall, what we'd like to see is for all of this aid, or as much of it as possible, to be tied to economic conditions so that it doesn't end too soon, because that was one of the lessons really from the last recession, is that a lot of the aid ended too soon, and that prolonged the recession and really made it much longer and more painful. You can take state fiscal relief as an example. If a state like Pennsylvania doesn't get the money that they need in order to fill their budget shortfalls, certainly I'm sure many of you on this call will advocate for raising revenue to try to fill that budget hole. But what we know is more likely to happen is budget cuts. And those budget cuts are going to mean things like laying off teachers, cutting education and healthcare and all of these services that help communities thrive and help people who are struggling. And if that is cut, that is going to, again, make the recession longer and more painful. So that's a quick rundown of some issue priorities. I would say like top ones to keep in mind are really trying to have measures that last, as long as unemployment remains high, state fiscal relief, SNAP benefits increase, and unemployment insurance. But as I said, certainly lots of other important issues that I'm sure many of you are working on as well. I want to talk a little bit about timing and process and where things stand and where your work can be most effective. So as I'm sure many of you know, the House passed a bill a few weeks ago called the HEROES Act, which had a lot of these issues that I just mentioned in it. And that essentially lays out the House Democratic priorities for eventual bipartisan negotiations between the House, Senate, and the White House. The Senate is not expected to pass their own bill, although we know that Democratic and Republican Senate leaders are formulating their priorities now for the eventual negotiation. So it's really important to help shape those priorities and respond to them as they are being announced. And as Jeff said, we do expect the actual negotiations to be happening in the last 2 weeks of July, possibly that first week of August, and an eventual bipartisan deal to be voted on at that time. So as I said, your work now and really through mid-July can help establish what should be the priorities that are brought to the negotiation table and build public support for members of Congress to be fighting for those priorities as the negotiations really get underway at the end of July. And one thing I want to note in terms of timing is that the House and the Senate are both going to be on recess around the 4th of July holiday. Their recesses don't line up exactly. For the House, it's June 27th to July 6th, and the Senate is July 3rd through 19th. But I want you to think about that recess time because members of Congress are going to be home. They're going to be more likely to see the local news, read the local paper. They might be, safely visiting places in your community where the effects of the pandemic and the recession are most stark. And then when they come back, particularly when the Senate comes back that week of July 20th, that's when the negotiations are really going to pick up. So everything that they are hearing from community members, from leaders in your state, seeing in the media up through that time is really going to be shaping, when they come back, what they are fighting for as the negotiations really pick up. So, I think things that are important to know in terms of your work in Pennsylvania. Obviously, you know your senators very well, Senator Casey and Senator Toomey. You know, Senator Casey is on the Senate Finance Committee, which a lot of these issue priorities that I just talked about, things like unemployment insurance, you know, state fiscal relief, that emergency grants proposal that I mentioned, also proposals to expand the earned income tax credit and child tax credit, which are great ways to put money back in people's pockets. All of those things fall under the jurisdiction of the Finance Committee. So, you know, Senator Casey has been leading on these issues and, you know, can continue to be a great champion. And I think it's important to thank him and to urge him to keep fighting for Pennsylvanians as he's doing now. You know, as I said, in the Senate Republican side, they are still formulating some of their priorities for the next bill, but it's really important for all members to be hearing, you know, about the issues that are important to the people in your state and what your state needs. I know Jeff and the team at PBPC have a lot of great ideas and opportunities for people to get involved. I would encourage you to think about, you know, media work like op-eds and letters to the editor, editorials, opinion columnists, you know, news articles, grassroots engagement, obviously, you know, mobilizing constituents to be contacting their members of Congress and asking them to fight for help for struggling families in the state. And really engaging with some of the grass tops and influential leaders in your state. For example, as Jeff mentioned, you know, a lot of your state legislators really understand the need for more state fiscal relief and have been vocal about that before. And so for them to be stepping up and speaking up and weighing in with your members of Congress about how important that is, that's a really powerful message. Leaders of your organizations can really powerfully speak to, you know, the impacts on the services that you provide and the communities that you work with if there were to be these devastating state budget cuts, you know, because no more fiscal relief is provided. So there's a lot of great ideas, as I said, that I know some of you are probably already thinking about, and that Jeff and the PBPC team are working to support you all. We're also here to help as we can. What I want to do now is pause because I have just said a lot really fast, and I'm sure I haven't been watching the chat. I'm sure there are questions, so I want to make sure we can use the rest of the time here for questions. Just thank you again, and if there are questions that I can't get to, I'm happy to answer some after over email.
Thanks, Deborah. We actually have the lines open here for folks. So if you have a question, all you need to do is just note, I have a question in the chat box and we'll call on you. While we give folks an opportunity to submit those, Deborah, do you want to talk just a bit about the sign-on letter that you've put together that we worked with you on here in Pennsylvania, specifically to Senator Casey because of his role on the Finance Committee?
Sure. So, you know, I saw Jeff sent out a sign-on letter along with the announcement for this meeting. And, you know, as I mentioned, Senator Casey is on the Finance Committee, and a lot of the issue priorities that we think are really important for the next package fall under the jurisdiction of the Finance Committee. Now, you know, for those of you who might understand from past federal work or from your state budget work, like committee processes and things, I want to be clear that this is not the kind of thing where like the Senate Finance Committee is going to mark up a bill and then the bill will go to the floor. It's not, quote, regular order like that. These negotiations are really going to happen at the leadership level. But still, the importance of Senator Casey being on the Finance Committee means that these are areas, these are issue areas that, you know, he has worked on before, that he cares about, that he has expertise in. And when leadership is negotiating the package, they're going to turn to, you know, the members who have that kind of expertise to see what they're advocating for. And so Senator Casey can be advocating with the ranking member of the committee, Ron Wyden, and asking him, you know, to lift up specific priorities. He can be talking to Senate Majority Leader Schumer. He can be rallying other Democrats in the caucus. And I want to be clear, like, he's a fantastic champion on these issues. So, you know, it's really just thanking him for his work and encouraging him to keep fighting. So that letter that Jeff sent around lifts up those issues. And I think it would be really great to have a strong showing of Pennsylvania Pennsylvanians, thanking him for his work and urging him to keep fighting for these important issues. So if you all can take a look at that and sign it, I know everyone at PBPC would really appreciate that. I
Great,
see a
thank you,
question
Deborah.
about the dates for the recess. I can actually put that in the chat because I have it here in my notes. But let me just say that for the House, that's June 27th to July 6th. And for the Senate, it's July 3rd through 19th. Let me just put that in the chat. So yeah, overlaps slightly, but you know, as you can see with when the Senate is going to be home, that really is driving the timing of the negotiations. You know, with them coming back July 20th, that's when the negotiations are really going to pick up the pace so that they can vote on something by the end of the month or that first week in August.
Thanks, Deborah. And again, folks can look for that information in the chat box. I'm going to go to our friend Eric Rosso, who has a question. Eric, why don't you go ahead? Oh, I'm sorry, Eric. I think I missed unmuting your line there. Okay, I think you need to unmute it on your end, Eric.
I got it.
There you go.
Thank you, Jeff. And thank you for that overview, Deborah. I'm curious how and if legislators in DC are thinking about state versus city or municipal aid. And I'm asking about this specifically in mind about Philadelphia. There's a lot of structural issues that usually come with aid to the city here for many awful reasons. So I was wondering if there's thoughts in DC about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And Eric, could you just tell me what organization you're from? Oh, I think you're muted again. Okay. Yes, local fiscal relief is definitely important as well. Can you guys hear me? Can you just give me a thumbs up just to make sure? Okay, great, thanks. So local aid is definitely important as well. You know, and ideally what we would like to see is, you know, the Bipartisan National Governors Association has said that just for states and territories, they need $500 billion in direct aid, and they need that additional increase in the FMAP, the federal matching funds. And they fully recognize, and actually the NGA has put out some fantastic joint statements with local government associations as well, saying that, you know, local governments need aid too, and we fully support that too. You know, I think one thing we have to be mindful of is, and there are some proposals out there that would unfortunately do this, is like not having local aid come at the expense of state aid, you know, so like not giving a pot of funds that then has to be split between state and local governments, which results in really neither level, but especially the state level, since that's where the needs are the greatest, getting the full amount that they need. But certainly state and local fiscal relief is very important, and we'd like to see both covered in the next bill.
Thanks, Deborah, and thanks for the question, Eric. We have a question from Pat. Pat, if you could unmute your line, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Okay, thanks. I'm with the Global Women's Strike and Every Mother's a Working Mother Network. And Deborah, I was glad to hear you mention some legislation that would make some changes in the Earned Income Tax Credit. And I was wondering if you were referring by any chance to the Worker Relief and Credit Reform Act that was introduced by Congresswoman Gwen Moore from Milwaukee and Marcia Fudge from Ohio. Because we feel like this is a very significant bill, because what it would do is would what she calls modernize the definition of worker, so that those of us who are unpaid, unwaged caregivers, mothers or caregivers for relatives or others in our household, that we would be eligible for the Earned Income Tax Credit on top of any other benefits we might have. And so and we were really excited about that. The sort of thing we've been working on for many years. And we understand that this bill would also expand the definition of work to include students in higher education. So I just wondered if you wanted to comment on that. And also, I think it's important for people to know what a kind of breakthrough bill this is. And I believe that, yeah, it's not only a bill, but they're asking for it to be included at the next stimulus package as well.
Mhm. Thank you. Yeah, I am familiar with that legislation. So the earned income tax credit and child tax credit, for folks who don't know, as Pat mentioned, like they're incredible tax credits to help families, particularly with low wages, and you get that money back. In your tax refund. But there's a lot of, they're incredible tax credits, but they leave a lot of people out. The credit improvements that we're advocating for are two in particular. One is for the child tax credit, to make the full $2,000 child tax credit, that's $2,000 per child, available to all low-income families, regardless of their earnings. So right now, in order to get some of the child tax credit back in your tax refund, it phases in very slowly as your earnings go up. And so we're saying that for tax year 2020, so this is for taxes that people would file in early 2021, to be able to get the full child tax credit if you're a family with low income, whether you have zero earnings or, further up the scale, but still low income. So that would make a tremendous difference, especially since, as we talked about, the unemployment rate is still going to be high for quite some time, but some of this aid might run out too soon. And so this is money that people would get back in early 2021. And again, we see that most families with low incomes, they get that money back and they spend it because they have needs. They spend it to buy clothes for their kids and food and things like that. So that's one change that we'd like to see. The other change on the earned income tax credit is to expand the earned income tax credit for workers not raising children, who right now they are either eligible for no earned income tax credit if they're younger than 25, or if they're older than 65, or if they are between those ages of 25 and 65, the amount that they can receive is so small that it doesn't actually do what we know the earned income tax credit can do for people. And so we'd like to see for tax year 2020 for the age range to be brought down so that younger workers are eligible, and to expand the maximum credit that they can get.
Thanks for your question, Pat, and thanks for the additional information, Deborah. That's going to be something we're going to be working on here in Pennsylvania, particularly ramping that up as we move through this economic crisis and the pandemic, is the Working Families Tax Relief Act. So thanks for highlighting that. We have a question from Tom, and after we go to Tom's question, Deborah does have another meeting she needs to get to, so we want to let her go. But if there's one last quick question after Tom, just drop that in the chat box and I'll call on you. On that note, we're going to go to Tom. You'll need to unmute on your end, Tom.
Thanks, Jeff.
There you go.
And thank you, Deb. My name's Tom Karasity. I'm with Vision for Equality. We advocate for policies and funding for people with cognitive disabilities. When the first stimulus round of money was coming out of Washington, large amounts of money, and again, I don't know how true some of these things are, but reports afterwards that money was going into places where it wasn't needed. It wasn't focused where the needs are. You read stories about this corporation taking advantage and this business taking advantage. Again, how true it's not, but recently I saw a number is up to $1 trillion in one article, not going where it needs to go. So I was wondering, first of all, is that a realistic picture of what happened the first time money was released? And if so, are they going to put more regulations or controls so money is going where the pain is most felt and not to unnecessary places?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks, Tom, for your question. Unfortunately, it sounds like some of what you're talking about is like the Paycheck Protection Program and some of the support for businesses, and that is not an area of expertise for me or for my organization, so I can't really speak to that. But certainly, all of the issue priorities that I mentioned are really about making sure that the people who are hurting are getting the aid that they need. So, things like SNAP benefits, the emergency grants proposal, the earned income tax credit and child tax credit that I talked about. It's all about making sure that the people who are really in need are getting the support they need. But sorry, I can't speak more to the business's question.
Yeah, okay. I was just wondering, because as they're trying to put a new package together, every dollar that goes in the wrong place is not a dollar that's going to where it's needed. And so I think it is part of our purview to make sure that those kind of guardrails are in any new packages that come out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then one last thing I'll say, and then unfortunately I have to go, but Jeff, if there's any other questions, feel free to send them over email.
Sure.
Is that, you know, we also do want to make sure that as these conversations are happening, we're not putting an arbitrary dollar limit on how much we can spend here, because really this is an unprecedented crisis and we need to be passing the aid that is needed to help us get through this. And we have a great piece that was just put out, I think last week. You know, I'm sure you all are familiar, oftentimes, you know, when people raise concerns about deficits, they say we can't saddle the next generation with this. But really, if we were looking out for kids, if we were looking out for the next generation, we would do what we need to do now to get people through this crisis and to not make the recession last any longer than it needs to. And we have just an incredible paper that really goes through that argument. So I can send that to you, Jeff, if you want to share that with others.
That'd be great, Deborah. Thanks so much for doing that. And thank you, Tom, for your question. And we'll continue to look at that and try to follow up with you and make sure that the funds are going where they really should be going and not more handouts to billionaires and corporations. Again, thank you so much, Deborah, for making the time to join us here today. We'll let you go, but on behalf of everyone here and everyone at the PBPC team, I want to let you know we really appreciate your insight and your information. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. I know we'll be talking soon.
Thanks, Deborah. We're going to continue on with a few final updates before we wrap up the call. But again, we'll continue to provide information. And if you do have any additional questions we didn't have time to cover or that you didn't get a chance to note in the box that you had for Deborah, you can certainly send those my way and we'll get those and get you in touch with Deborah directly for answers to that. We talked just a bit there. Deborah mentioned this sign-on letter we have for organizations in Pennsylvania to sign on, to call on Senator Casey, specifically in his role as a member of the Finance Committee, to be mindful of specific things that we really need to see in another major relief and recovery package. My colleagues here at Pennsylvania Budget and Policy Center, Kadita Kenner, Mark Steer, and Katie Personette, have been dropping some information into the chat box with links to some of these resources. So if we could get there the link again to the sign-on letter so folks can see what the letter covers. We wrote this in conjunction with Deborah and other folks at CBPP. There is a form you can go to, and I see Katie has put that in the box here as well, where you can add your organization's name. Now this is again for organizations, this is for individual ones. So we're looking for folks who are able to sign on their organization on behalf of that group to do that. We're just getting this started. I don't have a deadline for this yet. I want to double check with Deborah on that, but I think we're going to try to turn this around fairly quickly so that Senator Casey can begin to take a look at some of these ideas and some of these recommendations and move those forward. We'll have it open at least through this week and into next week. But obviously, the sooner that folks can take action on that, the better. If you're able to click on that right now and sign on your organization, that's great. If you have follow-up questions, don't hesitate to give me a call or send me an email, and I'm glad to do that. We also have ongoing right now an action that is geared for individuals. Certainly, we invite all of you to take action with this. This is an opportunity for folks to email Senator Casey and Senator Toomey about the need for them to support and to advance the HEROES Act, which was passed by the U.S. House. You know, we may not get the HEROES Act as it is right now, but we want to see at least as a basis for any relief package, all of these items included in that, along with some additional ones. So I would encourage you to take action. If you have a Facebook page, if you have an opportunity to email other folks, if you are able to send this out in an organizational newsletter, that would be great. You can certainly copy that link and put that there. This is the one for Tell Our Senators Support the HEROES Act. The more folks that we can get emailing Senator Toomey and Senator Casey, and particularly Senator Toomey, that would be great. They really need to feel the pressure to support the kind of coronavirus relief and recovery package that not just our state and local governments need, but that hardworking and increasingly desperate Pennsylvanians need. So we have the organizational sign-on letter. We have the online action for people to email to me and Casey. We are going to be rolling out a number of opportunities for folks to engage in advocacy with us over the next few weeks into the month of July in advance of the Senate coming back to begin to work on this. We will be setting up an online tool very soon for people to email their state senator and state representative to encourage them to join a sign-on letter that we'll put together and circulate. This will be a sign-on letter for our state legislators to sign on to that would go to our entire congressional delegation, both of our senators as well as all of our members of Congress in the U.S. House of Representatives. That will be coming out very soon. It'll be a great opportunity for people to email state legislators. We know that there are many Republican state legislators who recognize that ending the fiscal year responsibly and completing the budget without making cuts that are going to prolong the economic crisis will require federal relief and assistance. And the more state legislators from both parties that we can get signing on to that letter to our congressional delegation, the better. We'll also be looking at some other things over the next few weeks, some opportunities to do some Twitter storm activity, Twitter storms geared to our state legislators regarding the sign-on letter, but also having folks tweet directly to Senators Toomey and Casey. We'll be working on some graphics and some sample tweets for that and some hashtags. We really want to keep the pressure on throughout the summer. We'll also have some opportunities for folks to make phone calls to our senators and to our members of Congress. If we see individual members of Congress who are indicating resistance, we will turn up the pressure on them. If we find out that there are some, and we know there are some already, who are very supportive of this kind of relief recovery package, we'll have folks sending them messages of support and thanking them for that work. And again, Deborah mentioned there will be a need for letters to the editor, for op-eds from grasstops leaders, from organizational leaders. We'll be putting together some templates for that and doing some outreach as well. So we are heading into the summer months, and we will continue to keep the pressure on to see the kind of relief and recovery package that we're going to need to make sure that people in Pennsylvania get the assistance they need and that our state and local governments don't have to make the tough choices that will make life harder for Pennsylvanians and prolong the recession. So again, if you can sign on to the organizational sign-on letter to Senator Casey now or in the next couple of days, that would be excellent. Again, continue to help folks use the online tool to email Senators Casey and Toomey, and we'll keep you posted as we go forward. We will have, over the next couple of months into the summer, some of these 99% Pennsylvania-sponsored calls about this federal advocacy effort. It's not going to be weekly, but I'll send out information well in advance for folks, and we'll probably aim to do these typically on Thursdays at 1. But I would anticipate that we will do a couple more of these calls over the next month, 2 months. And again, thank you to my colleagues from the Pennsylvania Budget and Policy Center who've been helping out with providing information on this call. Katie Personette, Kadita Kenner, really appreciate their assistance today in making this Zoom meeting go smoothly. I want to thank, again, Deborah, although she's not here. We really appreciate having an ally like that working with us at the national level, taking the time to be here. I want to thank everybody who asked questions, Eric, Tom, Pat, really appreciate that. And for all of you who participated in the call today and joined us, really want to thank all of you for your interest, for your support on ending the state budget year responsibly, and for your advocacy with us on these important federal issues. You know, together we want to advocate for the 99% Pennsylvanians, not just the top 1% who've already gotten more than their fair share. So thank you very much. We'll keep you posted. Have a great summer, everyone, and thank you again.